Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back after lunch. I hope you are all full and full of ideas. So for the afternoon session at the Conference on the Global Refugee Crisis, Mobile People Under State Protection or Exploitation, we're now in panel 3, Contemporary World Crisis and the World. Contemporary Crisis and the World. And I will keep my comments brief as directed. And the first presenter will be Dr. Francesca Albanese of Georgetown University. Second will be Professor Hikari Ishido. And thirdly will be Miss Carla Hung of Duke University. So without further ado, Francesca, it's over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone got coffee so that's to digest a legal presentation soon after lunch. Just a precision. I'm not a doctor. So I don't hold a PhD, but just for honesty. And what I'm going to present about, it's something that was in a way born exactly in the Middle East Institute, because I'm, at the moment, after working for 9 years with the United Nations Human Rights and Refugee issues, 2 years ago, I embarked on a research project to write a book with another author, Lex Stackenberg, on Palestinian refugees in international law. It was supposed to be a second edition of a pre-existing book, but actually it came out very, very new in content and structure. And I was here 1 year ago, just mentioning the fact that as part of the survey that I had conducted for the book, I realized something extremely surprising, the fact that there were Palestinian refugees in Southeast Asia. And Professor Ho said, "Oh, why don't you write a paper about that?" And this is how some preliminary conclusions came into shape in this context. So I understand that there are quite a few in the audience who who are familiar with the issue of Palestinian refugees. So for those who are not, I will give a brief introduction of the genesis of the Palestinian refugee question. So who are Palestinian refugees and why they are so unique, and to what extent they are a contemporary crisis, because they actually are a contemporary crisis within the contemporary refugee crisis happening in various corners of the world. And what are they doing in Southeast Asia in particular? And based on this, on my findings, I will draw some preliminary observations. I will share with you some preliminary observation on the opportunities and constraints that they experience in the region. So first of all, starting with the genesis. Palestinian refugees are part of a 70-year-long exile. Their question is the longest, most protracted refugee crisis. They're also the largest number of refugees in the world, although they are statistically invisible. So they often are not counted in international, they do not appear in international figures. I can explain that later. But however, where do they come from? They come from British Mandate Palestine, and they're very connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because at the creation of the state of Israel, which happened after the UN had decided to partition British Mandate Palestine into almost equal territories, one for the Jewish people living there, and one for the Arabs, and which in 1947 were numbering around 600,000 the Jews and 1,300,000 the Arabs. This decision of the UN to partition the land created unleashed violence and a civil war that then turned into a sort of international war. Again, I will not have the time to now to focus on the history of the conflict. But again, if you wish to learn more about that, I'm happy to discuss this during the debate. But however, when the State of Israel was proclaimed, 2/3 of the original Arab inhabitants of Palestine, who were citizens of a British mandate and former citizen of the Ottoman Empire that had preceded the acquisition of the mandate over Palestine by the Brits, became stateless. They were either expelled or forced to flee by the circumstances, by the generalized violence and military operations that occurred in the territory. And after the creation of the State of Israel, between 1950 and 1952, Israel enacted a number of laws which made their return, the return of the around 750,000 Arabs of Palestine impossible, because they were denationalized through the Israeli nationality law, which recognized an entitlement to citizenship only for the Jews coming from wherever in the world to the State of Israel, and de facto preventing the possibility to go back and to acquire nationality for those who had been expelled. And also other laws that followed confiscated the property that had been left behind, and both during the war and after, about 400,000 villages and neighborhoods inhabited by the Arabs were razed. So there were really nowhere to go back to. And so the third picture that you see is what the state of Israel, the white part is what the State of Israel looked the day after the conflict, and it was until 1967, because in 1967 there was another war, and following which Israel occupied the two territories that were supposed to allocate, to be slated for the state of Palestine, and where the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. 50 years after, 50 years of military occupation after, and 300,000 extra refugees, which were expelled or forced to flee in 1967, produced this massive displacement that is the Palestinian refugees today. So following the 1948 and 1967, Palestinian refugees, which today number around between 5 and 7 millions, there are some disputes according to who counts them, they are mainly in the Arab world, but not only that. And I will talk about their waves of displacement later. So Palestinian, I'm sorry it's so small, it didn't look like that on my computer. But however, Palestinian refugees for a long time have been considered like the bête noire, like the sort of the odd one out in international law, because in the Refugee Convention, they which universalized the definition of who is a refugee. And created uniform standard of treatment, there is a provision, which is Article 1D, which says whomever is receiving protection or assistance from a UN agency or entity will not be entitled to the benefits of the convention. And this has been for a long time interpreted like, because the only ones who were receiving protection or assistance from another UN agency were Palestinian refugees, because the Palestinian refugees, as I mentioned, the crisis happened in 1948, and so it predates the entry into force of the 1951 convention. There is another part of this provision which says whenever the assistance or protection, this assistance or protection is seized, then this person will benefit from the convention. I will not. This is a provision that has been created so much discussion and disagreement, and still today there are doubts about its application. But long story short, they've been excluded in many ways from the protection they are entitled to as internationally recognized refugees, because in 1948, soon after the crisis, the General Assembly resolution passed the General Assembly passed a resolution, Resolution 194, stating that the refugees from British Mandate Palestine were entitled to return, and those who didn't want to be to return were entitled to compensation and help for resettlement. Basically, that resolution didn't define who were Palestinian refugees, and so there have been discussions around who they were. But however, they were those who were displaced by the conflicts and in 1948 and their descendants. As I said, the displacement of Palestinian refugees started in 1947. 48, but it didn't stop there, because wherever they have gone, they have enjoyed a different standard of treatment and different status according to basically to political circumstances, because most of them, as I mentioned, settled in the neighboring countries, in Jordan, where there are today 2 million, and most of them, as it was mentioned today, are citizens, except for a small minority. But still, even if they are citizens, they experience some discrimination. Officially, 450,000 Palestinian refugees are still in Lebanon, but in fact, the figures are much lower. They are 250,000, and they have no rights whatsoever. So they are considered less than aliens in many respects. Then there were 500,000 people in Syria pre-war, but 100,000 people more or less have left during the recent conflict. And over 1.5 million are in Gaza. And less than 1 million are in the West Bank. Others have settled, have moved to other Middle Eastern countries, but there were following the 1967 war, there have been turmoils in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Kuwait, in Iraq, and in Syria. And each situation of crisis has produced further waves of displacement, because the fact that they didn't enjoy protection made them vulnerable to further instability. And this is how, as I was researching, I realized that in recent years there are Palestinian refugees that have gone much further. Europe and Americas, which represented the next port of call for many of them during the Middle Eastern turmoil since started in the 80s and 90s. I realized that there were between 2011 and 2013 approximately 2,000 Palestinian refugees, mainly from Iraq, the occupied Palestinian territory, and in Syria, who had reached Southeast Asia. There are no previously recorded or diasporic ties of Palestinian refugees in this region. There is a small community in Australia, but so, and this country, this region is not an obvious place for Palestinian refugees, because normally their movements tend to reconnect with what today was being defined like the peer-to-peer connection. They go where they can get support. And their situation is particularly difficult because they do not enjoy that kind of tie here. At the same time, the situation is interesting in the region because, so let me give you some figures first. There are the numbers are not high, so it's not the numbers, because there are about 450,000 Palestinian refugees in Indonesia, 800 in Malaysia, and less than 500 in Thailand. But the thing is that they came because probably one of the elements that played in favor of them moving here is the fact that there were favorable visa policies for many of them, and the possibility to stay 1 month with the extension of another month. And another element is that unlike other countries, here they are in this region. They are less politicized, so they would probably expect they would not expect retaliation as it happened in other countries in the Middle East. At the same time, what happens here is, can this really be considered a safe haven this region. For Palestinian refugees, but here I would say what happens to them is not exceptional in the sense that it's probably common to other refugees as well. I'm really sorry, it's too small, but whatever. The Asia-Pacific region hosts 7.7 million of what UNHCR defines person of concerns, which are asylum seekers, refugees, internally displaced person, and returnees, both asylum seekers and refugees. And almost 3 million of them are in Southeast Asia. Although Palestinian refugees are a new phenomenon inside the region, they do face the same issues than others in terms of being this region lacking both an international and regional framework to protect refugees. Most of them are treated like irregular migrants, undocumented migrants. So UNHCR, I mean, I know that there is a presentation that will be given tomorrow, so I don't want to anticipate too much, but in the absence of national asylum system, in most of the cases, it's UNHCR who runs a refugee status determination, so recognize who is a refugee or legitimate asylum seeker has a right to get international protection. And Palestinian refugees, when they are already internationally recognized as such, get this refugee status determination through UNHCR. And at the same time, the response that refugee gets in this area is primarily security driven. They are perceived as a burden, they are perceived as a threat. Of course, this is not specific to this region only, because as we have heard this morning, this is a generalized feeling that refugees and asylum seekers have everywhere, unfortunately, nowadays. But the fact is that lacking international and national framework makes them exposed to the risk of arrest, detention, and deportation, makes them bearing no right to access to basic services, education, health, and or job opportunities. There are some exceptions. For example, I know that Malaysia is, as of March 2017, started a project to offer job opportunities to Rohingya. I have no details about how effective it is, but it's an important development. Indonesia also in December 2016 passed a decree which allows them refugees and asylum seekers to stay in the country without being deported. But again, the application of the decree is still it's undiscernible, the positive effect of it, because there are cases where deportations have been refugees have been threatened with deportation and arrest and detention. One particular case that caught my attention is that there were 95, in 2015, I guess, there were 95 Palestinian refugees who were found in detention in Indonesia. And in some of the cases, they had reported themselves to the Indonesian authorities because they had no means to leave. They were just the most destituted and had no networks to rely upon. So this, of course, again, the marginalization and the exposure to vulnerability is not a feature of Palestinian refugees only, but it's, as it was said this morning already, it's essential that a human rights approach be considered by these countries, because marginalization of refugees just turned them into a self-fulfilling prophecy, turned individuals who could be possible actors for change in the host country into marginalized individuals, which probably be exploited and abused and turned into whatever activities they might found, even if they in the realm of less legal ones. So I would stop here, because I mean there are other things that I didn't manage to touch upon, but I'm running out of time, so I'm happy to take questions if there are later on. Thank you.
Can I now ask Professor Hikari Ishido to deliver his presentation on the Rohingya in Myanmar?
Sure. Thank you very much. So, very good afternoon to everyone. It's my honor to be invited to this kind of important occasion. So let me just start, because I have just a limited time. So first of all, let me just flip through those photos. I mean, so please, can you please switch to the website? I mean, the Internet Explorer. I mean, I have already asked the lady to just, or maybe, yeah, I can just go there and then just. Yep, you have the photos because I just want you to have a very brief view on Rohingya situation. Thank you very much. So please switch to the Internet Explorer. I had already uploaded some photos and about Rohingya. Okay, but anyway, so Rohingya in Myanmar. Okay. So I can just okay go.
You have to point towards the video.
All right. Okay. Okay. So oops. It's not working. Okay. So why is it? Right. So let me just skip that photo part now. Oh yes, yes. So here in the background, I have some photos about this ethnic cleansing, looking atrocity, okay, rapes, all those murderous incidents. So that's those are the issues we might have to think about. So that's. But I'm an economist by training, and so I really do not address these issues. But today's occasion is to discuss different kind of military or political issue. And that's why I just wanted you to have a quick look. And then here's Aung San Suu Kyi. So thank you very much. So please return to the. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have poor eyesight, so let me just stand up right here. So Rohingya, and not even refugees with a nationality. So Rohingya is the people living in and around Rakhine state of Myanmar. Rakhine is the western part, of Myanmar, bordering Bangladesh. Okay. So and currently it is not made clear whether the Rohingya is an ethnic group or a religious group or a political association. It is necessary to keep in mind that the problem surrounding Rohingya's ethnicity is still being discussed in academia. In Myanmar, the Rohingya people are purposefully called Bengalis or Bengali immigrants based on the claim that they are illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. The Rohingya people are therefore not even refugees with a clearly defined nationality, nor are they considered an ethnic minority in Myanmar. So Aung San Suu Kyi, Myanmar's de facto leader, denied that there is ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya in the north of the country, despite the UN report stating evidence to the contrary. So that's the basic situation. And then about the history, just a brief. Just briefly, during the colonial period, the United Kingdom as the colonial master, and then later some mention of Japanese and army in my analysis, but in this part, the UK had the colonial master developed new agricultural land in the Rakhine state. The country also brought massive Bengali Muslims to provide the agricultural activity. Even in the period when the Rakhine state governing body was not functioning, so there is no fixed record, and the influx of Bengali did not stop. And then arguably, these people are said to form a majority of the group of currently known as Rohingya. But the designation Rohingya is widely used in Muslim countries, and the United Nations agencies are using the designation Rohingya refugees. So just slide. So the majority of Rohingyas are Muslims. And in Islam, I don't know so much about Islam, but a man can hold up to 4 wives, etc. So the population of Rohingya, and then this part is surely mentioned in an interview with a former high-ranking officer of the country of Myanmar. So that's why I'm mentioning this in my analytical paper. The number of family members per household in a Bengal family is said to have grown to more than 30 at present, and then this demographic trend is also heightening the tension between Rohingya and other citizens of Myanmar, mostly observing Buddhism. So it's surely not supposed to be a religious kind of conflict, of course, but somehow there's this kind of meta level concern. So we are, in this regional, global relational study science, we are trying to deal with micro, meso, macro, and also this kind of meta issue. So people have the perception that okay, those people are like observing this, and then we are observing that. So we are different. We cannot be together. So that's at meta level. From the perspective, Bengali who have invaded Rakhine state in various ways have been trying to make a Muslim state using the designation Rohingya after Myanmar's independence. So to some people, Rohingya was just a politicized or invented word. So ethnic minorities in Myanmar. So as I mentioned, the Rohingya people are stateless from the perspective of Myanmar, of course. So they are not included in this picture, but it said that there are more than 100 ethnic groups in Myanmar. And so, the government of Myanmar, prioritize, this, internal, conflict resolution, and then, and then marginalize, this issue of, whether, this, group of people are, immigrants or not, because, even within, minority recognized, minority groups, there is this, this, conflict resolution issue high on agenda. So that's why. Burma, okay, so these states have these ethnic compositions, but more than 100, like I said. So just a rough idea. And then language-wise, it's quite diverse. So one Burmese person could speak like 10 dialect kind of languages in Myanmar. So, as mentioned above, one of the fundamental factors in the current Rohingya problem is that people who are regarded as Rohingya in the province of Rakhine as part of British colonial policy originally came from the West. So that's the key word. In South Asia, from the poorest countries, especially the neighboring country of Bangladesh, or they were brought in during British colonial policy. But when Burma later became independent from the UK, there was a shift in the nature of the conflict. So in terms of the relational study, the shift was quite important. So it became conflict between Burmese side and illegal refugees, of course from the perspective of the government of Myanmar. And then this phrase only makes sense under state sovereignty. Since Myanmar and the neighboring Bangladesh both have the sovereign state system in the Westphalian sense that was already talked about, those without nationality are not even protected. As for Myanmar's sovereign system, the idea of integrating Burma as a single nation state after independence was driven by so-called Burmese-style socialism, or Burmese way to socialism, which places an expectation for the construction of the nation to have Buddhism at its main axis, maybe implicitly or too explicit to mention. So that's why it's implicit. But so, and then as a rebellion against Britain, I just put this, in parentheses, as a Christian nation and its colonial rule, there seems to have arisen this idea of Burma's original integration idea. So we wish to be independent from, this, situation. So that's why, they needed, this Burmese or not too much emphasis on Buddhism, but Burmese style way to socialism. So that was their identity or for identity, formation. So this philosophy comprises at least part of the conflict between the Burmese people and the Rohingya as non-political. So Rohingya non-interference principle of ASEAN. While the international public opinion in favor of Rohingya, as you can see in Newsweek articles or Economist articles, the 30th ASEAN summit held in April last year did not directly address the Rohingya issue. This omission derives from, is intentional and deriving from the fact that ASEAN member states observe what is called non-interference principle concerning intra-ASEAN diplomatic relations. However, some changes are being observed there. So about 2 years ago, Malaysian Prime Minister led a rally protesting what he called Myanmar's genocidal Rohingya. In a meeting of ASEAN foreign ministers in December this year, Malaysian foreign minister stated that the situation of Rohingya Muslims was of regional concern and should be resolved together at the ASEAN level. And Indonesian President Jokowi discussed the Rohingya crisis with Myanmar State Council Aung San Suu Kyi. Jokowi is reported to have told Suu Kyi that stability in Myanmar was important not only for the country but also for the region on the whole. And then these instances indicate that there is significant degree of concern for the plight of the Rohingya, at least in the Muslim majority Malaysia and Indonesia as member of ASEAN. So setting aside diplomatic issues, there are some geo-economic factors behind the Rohingya problem. First and foremost, the population density in Bangladesh, 1,252 people per square kilometer in this year is much higher than that in Myanmar, 81 people per square kilometer in the same year. So because of the lack of arable land for food production, life is perceived to be severer, tougher in Bangladesh than in Myanmar. The migratory pressure from Bangladesh to Rakhine State in Myanmar, where the land is relatively wider and more fertile, is only natural from economic perspective. Thus, the Rohingya's plight has political, economic, and religious somewhat, arguably dimensions. For Burmese people who hold Buddhist belief, there is no psychological preparation to accept and coexist with Muslims, and then its related cultural and lifestyle customs. This is fueling the crisis level of the Rohingya problem. Indeed, multicultural coexistence or symbiosis is a matter of easier said than done. Interview with Myanmar's former Prime Minister. The interview with Myanmar's former Prime Minister, Mr. Kim Yoon, by the author in last year, shared the socioeconomic concern held by most ethnic groups in Myanmar. He has written a book which is entitled in Burmese, Challenge of Myanmar's Westgate. In the book, he stated that the Rakhine State in Myanmar has long been a land that has nothing to do with Bengali Muslims. There is no historical document indicating the presence of Rohingyas in Rakhine State. That's what he says in his book. During the Rakhine dynasty period, when Bangladesh did not yet exist, the dynasty had dominated the mountainous region. However, as the border was drawn during the British colonial days, ethnic tensions arose in the region. And then, so I did a bit of a text, analysis using a software, and then here is the result. So Muslim at the center. So he, Mr. Kim Yoon, devout Buddhist, he never uses word Rohingya. So Muslims and then Rakhine, people, Buddhist people. So they are, victimized by the Muslims. So that's a picture. That's a framing done by Mr. Kim Yoon in his book, yet to be published in Japanese and or in English, but in Burmese it's available. So 1942, burned down, killing. So he has these meta concerns in his mind. So that's why he is trying to do something about this issue of concern. So Mr. Kim Yoon also voices concern over the future of Myanmar. His book mentions that if Rohingyas gain control of the Rakhine State, if they try to be independent from Myanmar as a Muslim state. So that's what he fears. That's what he states in his book. In Southeast Asia, where Myanmar is located, there are Muslim countries. Since these countries do not side with the viewpoint of Myanmar, they criticize Myanmar, thereby heightening the tension, he says in his book. The Rohingya problem is becoming a global topic and discussed at the United Nations by hiding the fact and making the press, twisted press. To echo Mr. Kim Yoon's viewpoint, wealthy Muslim countries with oil power that are using the world media and reporting the Rohingya problem as a human rights issue and politically charged refugee problem. For Mr. Kim Yoon, these are created stories. At any rate, the current government of Myanmar has the responsibility problem of Rohingya. That's what I would think. So conclusion, in the discussion of Rohingya national sovereignty at the ASEAN level, of course, is at issue. ASEAN member states are not monolithic in their policy stance on how the Rohingya issue could be addressed officially in ASEAN. The consensus-based ASEAN way is democratic, yet it can lead to non-decision making when national sovereignty is at stake. Mutual distrust among the stakeholders should be removed. But who are the clearly defined stakeholders in the first place? Rohingya is a non-state actor together with the international public opinion in favor of Rohingya. So the Rohingya is a problem across the beyond and sovereign state. Due to globalization, it has become common for activities of pluralistic entities, political entities, ethnic, civil society, business entities to interfere with each other. Therefore, relevant policy must address how to create peace and relate to others who have different reasoning and values than the group to which one belongs. For example, when the national body or ethnic group seeks to maximize some interest, it is inevitable that in doing so, the body or group will push the other to the point of reluctance, which is negative feedback in terms of relationship. So, in terms of relational, I'm studying, some kind of new relationship building is of course very much needed. And there are also stakeholders who do not think highly of relationships. So the question of whether consideration tolerance toward non-tolerant others with a valid behavior immediately arises. Okay, so it is necessary to grasp the limitation of these concepts in the face of emerging crisis involving non-state actors. I'm just sort of generalizing, my case. Rohingya in international political opinion most importantly. So necessity to develop a higher level arrangement involving the global civil society. A higher level arrangement will be necessary. And then for reference, focal point of analysis. Okay, it's just relation analytical. So sources of ethnic conflict in Myanmar and elsewhere, distrust against each other. So at the meta level, but the distrust often comes from different power endowment, political, economic value of language. So economic value of language could come into the picture. So we should try to control for these factors and then try to, of course, resolve this conflict at the meta level. So that's what I would think. So reference, just a reference, philosophical reference. Godel's Incompleteness Theorem. Self-reference, when there is self-reference of national identity, then there could be a problem of incompleteness. The first incompleteness says that non-consistent systematic actions through theorems can be created by an effective procedure is capable of providing all truths about the arithmetic of the natural number. So axiomatic definition of who Burmese is the very source of conflicts and instability. Because it's axiomatic, without needing any other proof. So that's why it could be the very source of conflict. Anyway, so I'm usually doing this kind of multi-level analysis. So I will go into the Rohingya area, or near Rohingya part, and also minority area, and then conduct kind of a multi-level study to understand the critical value of the wage, the income gap, etc. So that's what I would try to do in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.